Lisa, I have a question. It's Mary.
Hi, Mary.
Hi. Sometimes when you pick up an accidental, it's often just for one note. You put it down, you carry on. Sometimes that note is needed like 4 or 5 bars later. And unless you're on top of it, you put it down and then you have to pick it up again. Do you have a symbol? Right now, I just put a little arrow which tells me to hold on to that. How would you mark that you keep that accidental in your hand? Don't just treat it as a one note thing.
Yeah, that's a good question, Mary. I don't know if I have a really good answer right now, because I know what you're talking about. Sometimes I do that where I'm thinking, oh, I don't need to play this F sharp anymore. I put it down. Oh, 3 bars later. Oh no, wait a minute. It's supposed to be in my hand. Yeah, no, maybe your arrow is a good idea to indicate keep it in your hand. I think if you use the system or whatever system you develop, that I spoke about in the tutorial or that you've developed yourself, if you don't have a marking that says table it, then by default, it has to stay in your hand. So
yeah, I find I need something a little more explicit than that. I lose my confidence. I think, did I just forget to table it, But
right.
Thank you. My little arrow works, but I just wondered if there was something, more general that people used.
Oh,
my marking for that is the word keep.
Keep, yeah.
I started with that. That's what I started with, Lloyd. But yes, it works too.
You do have to eventually trust your markings, though. But I know what you're talking about. You're in the middle of it, and you're like, oh no, and you start to panic. And
yeah.
Oh, my question is, what is your marking for switching a bell from one hand to another, or your marking for giving your bell to another person?
Okay, so those are 2 different questions. Okay,
yes.
So if a bell is normally, let's say, your left hand bell, then I would put LH and then an arrow and then RH to tell me to take it from my left hand and put it in my right hand. Sometimes though, so that's if it's already in my left hand, right? I guess that looks like my right hand, but it's really my left hand. So if it's already in my left hand, that's what I would write, LH, arrow, RH. But if I haven't picked it up yet, and it's normally my left hand bell, but now I have to pick it up with my right hand, I just write RH on top of that note to pick it up with the right hand, right? And if you're gonna pass the bell to another ringer, you write down what position you're passing it to. So if you're in position 7 and you need to pass that bell to position 8, I would, the last time I played that note and I'm going to pass it, I would write put a little arrow from the head of the note and write an 8, which would mean pass that bell to position 8. Don't say pass that bell to Mary, because Mary might not be in position 8 next time you play the piece, right? Always the position number, not the person.
For me, I use straight arrows and squiggly arrows and arrows with loops in them. So a straight arrow will generally be putting the bell down to the table with an arrowhead.
Right.
And if I'm then picking up a different bell, the new bell, and a little jagged arrow up to where that new bell actually plays.
Okay.
So that tells me that my, whatever note that is going down to the table. And then I pick up whatever the new note is, and there's a little lightning bolt arrow up to the new note. If I'm switching a bell from one hand to the other, my arrow has a loop in it with an arrowhead, and the L or the H at the other end for the receiving hand.
Mm-hmm. That's cool.
I like the loop because that means it's still in the air somewhere rather than going somewhere. It's still in the air.
And that's really cool. Like, that's the thing. There is no standard way to do this. The only thing I would say is that you might want to put a little legend at the beginning of your music if there's ever needs to be a substitute, because if I was your substitute, I wouldn't know what an arrow with a loop was. Now that you tell me, it totally makes sense. I love it. But LH to RH is something more universal. So I love your system. If it works for you, you go for it. But I'd write a little legend at the beginning, or
I like
put it
the
in the front of
legend
your
at the
binder.
beginning idea. I like that.
Yeah, put it at the beginning of your binder and just say, these are my markings. This is the translation.
Maybe we can start a little movement in the handbell world to make that a standardized
Yeah.
symbol.
And maybe there is something and I've just missed it. I don't know. Like I have several books, that have all sorts of handbell techniques and all the markings for those things. And like I said, there's a lot of things written for solo ringers. And a lot of that applies to us anyways. Like we use those same things, like changing bells to a different hand or whatever, but I haven't found. So if anybody finds anything, let me know.
Mm-hmm.
Lisa, one of the things that I was thinking about when I saw your video was you spent some time talking about changes within a piece. And I was thinking, to me, that's a really logical thing. Like I see that in my handbell rehearsals. The problems always seem to happen at a transition or a change. And I think about I was thinking about when I have student teachers and I'm talking to them and I say, if you're going to have a problem, it's normally going to be at a transition between activities. So in a handbell piece, a transition between keys or a transition between techniques or
page turn.
Hand chimes. That's where I always seem to see the problems. So any comments on like reinforcing with your players about really marking stuff at those points?
Those are all great examples, and page turns, I would say, is another one. Page turns are the bane of our existence. We always talk about in our group how we want those iPads where you just, press it with your foot and you get so you don't ever have to actually physically turn the page. That's in those instances you referred to are perfect examples of when we super need to mark our score. And so I often will say, we come across, like you said, it's a key change or a technique change or an equipment change or a page turn. And one of the questions I ask frequently, Lori and Pat can attest to this, I'll say, do you have it marked in your score? Do you have the change? Do you have the bell that you need marked in there so you know? Because preparation is the key. So that's where your markings will really come in handy. Like they come in handy all the time, but for those really difficult sections, that's where your markings come in. And then you just practice the heck out of those changes.
I actually have that program you're talking about for the iPad for changing pages in the music, but I don't have a foot switch for it yet.
Yeah, you need the foot
Maybe
switch.
that'll be a Christmas present.
Ask Santa for it. Wait a minute, you look like Santa. Hold on.
I'll ask myself later.
Excellent dialogue, excellent discussion, excellent questions and answers, Lisa. Thank you again for hosting and answering all of our questions. Good night. Everybody stay safe and keep well.
Good night, everybody.
Merry Christmas.
Thank
Merry
you.
Christmas.